Okay, as you take your seats, three, Bob, if I can start with you, because I mean, you gave us a fascinating insight into how you manage things with McDonald's. But look, you're talking about getting out of a target zone for, and let's say in this case, for those who want to shut racing down because of their views on animal welfare. They're not going to go away, those people. So how do you get out of the target zone?
Well, one is to realize that you can't work with an animal rights organization. So if they're trying to destroy your business, you have to come up with a way to counteract that. And plus they're dealing with a lot of emotion as well. So as I talked about in my keynote, the key to getting out of the target zone is having third parties back you up. But a lot of companies aren't willing to do that. Because, in order to get I had a scale. Let me describe this to you. So we must have had 30, 40 NGOs, nonprofits work with McDonald's on all these issues over my career. And I would always use a model of a scale of 1 to 10. That organizations should work with an independent party. Don't work with the ones that are 1, 2, 3, and 4. What I mean by that is they're kind of corporate friendly. Because if you're working with a corporate friendly, nothing wrong with them, but how are they going to give you credibility to the public? Then you have other NGOs that are like 9 or 10. They're radicals. They want to destroy your business. I'm not going to invite PETA. I mean, PETA was, they're not going to be collaborative with McDonald's, so I wouldn't invite them in. But I want to bring in the 5, 6, and 7s, the ones that are fiercely independent, they're scientific. We couldn't buy them off. I want them to have credibility to the public, so that when you invite them in and say, because the only way you're going to counteract it's these animal activists, they got a good gig going. They know how to do the videos. They know how to arouse emotion for the consumer. So the best way to do it is you have to create your own story through a third party. I'd be interested in what others think. I didn't hear a whole lot of this during this conference, the idea that you work with outside parties. So my thought is perhaps this industry is thinking too inward. The fact is you have to please the consumer. The consumer's not going to believe, they'll believe people like me. I understand that, I heard that. But people like me are not going to believe anything unless they hear it from a source that they believe.
Okay, that's a very honest account of what you've seen here, Bob. Vicky, who are the environmental defense funds for racing, if you like? Who are the equivalents? Do you know where to turn, how to bring them in?
I know in the US they've tried to engage a little bit with PETA, but found
Mission impossible on that, isn't it?
Yeah, some of their tactics are pretty bad. I mean, they're getting into sales and race courses, and they actually are hoping for a horse to break down, which is the opposite to anybody in the industry. So, and that's what we actually try and articulate and communicate is we go to these events hoping for the safest, best outcome possible, and they're not. So there's a shared value, complete misnomer there. It's just not happening. So, and that's articulating and talking to activists. We do find that one of the most effective ways, because I often have to debate them on the radio, is you point out that ultimately they don't want you to own a dog or a cat. They don't want anybody to be able to eat meat. And that value system immediately puts them out of alignment with, well, certainly 98% of Australians, probably Americans as well. So in that space, sort of that shared value system, I find the easiest thing to default to. In terms of what specific organisations there are, I'm not sure who would be the most open to it. I know that we've found the SPCA very good in many ways. Jamie's probably had experience with the SPCA. I think you've brought them in on several occasions, haven't you?
Yeah, no, the SPCA, it is a challenge to find those challenges, really. I mean, the ones that you're happy to engage with, and I mean, I take Bob's point. You shouldn't be overly comfortable engaging. They should be challenging. And I think we're open to challenge, but it's got to be a sensible challenge because, as Vicky said, there's plenty out there that it's actually not only racing they're trying to get at. As societies have become more urbanised, people have had less interaction with animals, they have less understanding of animals, and they would effectively like to see people not have pets. And I think that's something that's going to be very difficult for us to overcome. We've got a couple of organisations in Australia who I would describe more as activists, and I won't name them, I wouldn't give them the credibility of naming them. But we do engage with the RSPCA quite strongly. We've got an Equine Welfare Advisory Council on which the RSPCA is part, together with other animal behaviouralists, human behaviouralists, and I think it's getting that understanding. And just on that, it's an interesting point. The inclusion of having a human behaviouralist or a human change agent on that group has had more effect than I ever could have imagined. Because it was taking it away from just the animals themselves. It was looking into the people, the actual people who have got their hands on the animals and trying to work with them. And that's been a very successful, I think, move to make.
I just want to add one more idea that I was thinking about here. McDonald's employed a lot of open doors strategies. So as you heard in my talk, I believe in openness. And another good strategy to counteract all these activists is your industry willing to open your doors? And we would invite moms and families to go where our food comes from. We invite them to our suppliers. Are you willing to open your doors to how animals are treated, the horses? Record that and give them carte blanche ability to put on their blogs or whatever it is to communicate what they learn. Because to Vicky's point, they're going to believe them.
There's a couple of great initiatives. In America, there's Horse Country, which is awesome. And they spoke at the last Asian Racing Conference. It's a tremendous initiative that every country needs. National Horse Week in the UK is incredible. I mean, they've got 13,000 people that they open their doors to that come in to see the stables and how they operate.
So it works.
It works. We need it in Australia.
Well, so if you're not willing to open the doors, that means there's something maybe that you don't like that you want to show.
Correct.
So therefore, I would look at changing anything that you're not comfortable with. I mean, why are you doing it if people don't like it?
Yeah, I don't think there's that lack of willingness to open doors in Australia. I think we're more than willing to open doors. And we have, at some of our race courses, we have events frequently. I think one of the challenges is that if we're being honest, and we've seen where some people from some sports have tried to pick up and move into racing, the strategies that they've adopted. But the one difference is the complexity when you involve an animal in a sport. It's multiple times more difficult to get that level of engagement. And we go right back to like in their in the children's formative years in schools and that. People can go and pick up a cricket bat, kick a football, hit a tennis ball, and they're encouraged to do for sport. They can't go and swing on a horse and gallop it around the playground. And then you add in the other social elements that the teachers are actively educating students against being involved in racing. So in their formative years, their education is taking them away from racing. And maybe that's where somehow some focus has to change.
Can I just ask, Bob, we were talking a little bit earlier and you referenced, I think it was Christophe Lemaire, the jockey talking to us on Monday, about the use of the whip. And he finds it very frustrating that there's a lot of criticism of jockeys time and time again about using the whip, which you found that astounding, that there would be that public frustration about something as offensive to many people as the whip. Now, to me, that suggests it shows the complexity of the sport. And you've come in from the outside and you've thought, I don't like the idea of this whip thing. That's not good. How does racing get round that issue? Because there'll be plenty of people here saying, well, they don't understand.
Exactly. Well, that was the most surprising thing to me the first day here, listening to the two jockeys who seemed like nice people, but the way they talked about horsewhipping, it's like, it didn't really seem like they cared about the horses, they cared about winning the race. That was my take on their message. And I go, wow, are these people trained, on how to communicate to somebody that I don't know that much about horse racing? I don't know how you solve the issue. I don't know how big of an issue it is, but I hear it is a big issue. But you either need to open your doors and be able to explain it so that the public will accept it, or you have to change it. The polystyrene package that I opened my keynote speech, to me is a good example. Believe me, every executive at McDonald's loved that package. It was effective, it was cheap, it protected the product. Nobody wanted to change that product in the company. But we did, because there was an alternative that could work. I have a feeling that there probably is an alternative that could work. I mean, I don't know what it would be, but the fact is, I really do believe that if you're not comfortable exposing your business to the front page of the New York Times, then you should change something.
Jamie, I don't want to get right into the issue of the whip and where its position should be within racing itself. But is there more research that should be done, that can be done? And then obviously how it's communicated, as you pointed out, is very important. But are we still in that area for some of these issues?
I think the last bit's the key to it, David, and Bob's touched on again. I don't think the sport is, so far as I'm aware anyway, the sport's not against opening their doors. I think, and it comes back towards Vicky's space, it's communication. We have not been effective in the way we communicate, or we haven't been effective enough. And that's where there needs to be further consideration given and improvement made, because I think if...
But what if you can't communicate it away? I mean, well, the fact is we love the polystyrene container. No matter what we did, we couldn't get the consumer to like it. So we got rid of it, and the world changed. Yeah. All of a sudden, people don't hate us anymore.
I accept that, but again, I think my belief is that the jockeys, and you touched on it yourself, that the jockeys don't understand and haven't had explained to them in understandable language, and we keep coming back to understandable language, that what it's all about. They need to understand what it's all about. Then you will get, if you can embed that message in them and that understanding in them, you will then potentially and hopefully get behavioural change. If you don't get that, if you don't achieve it, well, of course, then you shouldn't be too proud to say, well, that has not worked and we have to reconsider it.
So has your industry done research on how the consumer feels about this? Is there a communication, Vicky, is there a communication message that works here that you've seen?
I think personally, the whip is an education gap we can never overcome. I don't think that we can never overcome. I don't think so. No, I don't think that we could ever convince, 26 million Australians that it's okay to hit a horse when you get thrown in jail doing that to a human, and you'd be, ostracised to Siberia if you did that to your dog. So I just struggle to see that education piece. Now, whether or not it's a welfare issue, the science is quite inconclusive, I believe. However, the education gap is enormous.
Yes.
Is there also a gap in terms of, we're looking at a sport which is it is very complex, very disparate, as you pointed out, Jamie, very disparate groups of people involved in this, and geographically different approaches as well. And whether you're talking about jumps or the flat, they're different with different challenges, but also other areas of equestrianism are different. Vicky, how do you align common positions when you've got such a complex and varied sport?
I think you need to, put yourself in the shoes of the person interpreting it. And I've found what's been most effective with my team is I encourage them to go and seek out young people, but most of my team are young, particularly a lot of the young females, seek out their peer group and actually talk to them about key issues. As I said, even if they hate horse racing, if you approach this with a perspective of curiosity, the worst thing that can happen is that you learn something and you learn how to communicate it better. So we do a lot of trying stuff out, testing. We try it on my team's friend groups, and we do a lot of focus groups with them to find out what their perspectives are and how to communicate to them. But it has to be done, in an engaging and entertaining way. And there's a lot of education that can be disguised as entertainment, a lot of it. And so it's just a matter of making it creative, and instead of the two-camera interview that our industry loves so much, it's putting the on the shoulder perspective and bringing people in and making it a lot more transparent. Authenticity is now what sells.
Thank you for that. I've got a question that's come here from the floor from George Souris. It's pointed at you, Bob. Interesting question this. Did you show McDonald's customers the slaughterhouses when you open up the doors?
I'm sure I didn't show what now?
The slaughterhouses. Did you give them the full picture?
Well, we'd like to think we gave them the full picture because we allowed our partners like Dr. Temple Grandin and others to go in there and do what they do. And so, obviously, you don't videotape the actual slaughter, process, but we gave access to experts, and that's what experts, the consuming public, if you're going to gain their trust, that's why I emphasize they're going to trust the Dr. Temple Grandins of the world. And when it comes to their view of like, is the slaughterhouse practices okay? If Dr. Grandin says they're okay, they're going to believe that. So our strategy was always to communicate to the consumer through third parties. So to me, that's really key. It's a really key thought is, you don't want to be tricky. These issues are so tricky. They're complicated. So you can't go directly to consumer on them. You have to work with these experts. Then they almost get instant credibility. So if the Environmental Defense Fund says McDonald's did an outstanding job with packaging, they're credible, the consumer is going to believe it. So that's the way, the formula to achieve that.
It's interesting, and you've mentioned Temple Grandin. We were lucky enough to hear from Natasha Hamilton about gene doping yesterday. Jamie, these scientists who have the ability to put over messaging in a way that we might understand. I remember Natasha had a couple of graphs up there. There were words on it I'd never seen before, but she could explain it. They are desperately hard to find, aren't they?
I don't think they're necessarily hard to find. They're out there. They're doing the work now. But it's just, again, it's having them being properly engaged, or us engaging with them properly, to explain to them what we actually require. Not tell them what to say, but explain to them that we need to be able to understand it ourselves, the same as if we're going to try and open the doors and allow school kids into see what happens, in language they can understand. And I appreciate the challenges that gives to scientists and researchers, because they work in highly specialised fields and they're dealing daily with complex matters that actually are associated with complex messaging. So it's a matter of uncoupling that. And simply, one of the examples I use is, you'll hear veterinarians who, I hold in enormously high regard, but you'll hear them talk about distal limbs. And you say to them, why don't you just say the lower leg? Oh, okay. There's simple changes that can be made to the language that we utilise. And I don't want to dumb it down too much. That'd be ridiculous to do that, because I understand we need levels of protection too in the information we're putting out, so that it's accurate, and if challenged, it withstands challenge. So there's a balance there, but I do believe that headway can be made in making our messaging more clearly understandable to all levels.
And as part of that picture, and it's stride together, you talked about the need for collaboration on research and benefits. How do you pull that collaboration together across this international sport?
Yeah, that is a big challenge. And I think an element of the challenge is overcoming researchers wanting to publish articles and have them accepted in journals prior to sharing the information more broadly. So there's great credit in having articles published in journals. It adds value to your research institution, and so that is a challenge, to get people to come together and be willing to be open to it and co-author things more broadly. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, and I'll use a non-horse racing example, non-horse welfare example, and I'll use a jockey example. With safety vests and helmets, I wouldn't know how many studies have been done around the world to try and develop and understand the most effective safety vests for jockeys and helmets. but they've all replicated each other. And when you pick up the rule book now, the Blessed Bible, they all list the same standards as being acceptable. So they've all come to same or similar outcomes. And if there had been one pool of money created, if you, instead of operating all these different projects, you have just tossed it all into one pot, who knows, you would have either achieved, in my view, you would have achieved the same outcome at a far lesser price, or alternatively, with a bigger bucket of money, you would have been able to do a more expansive piece of work.
Yeah. I've got another question here, which is bringing us back to language, actually, and I think that's becoming a theme of getting messages over. They've got to be understood. Vicky, if I'll start with you, and then I'd like to get Bob's view on this as well. The question is a very clear one. How important is language? So whip or padded crop? How much difference does that make to people? Maybe it's too late, I don't know. But another example has been given here. We talked about a single licensed operator versus a monopoly. So, I mean, that's one very good emotive example, the whip versus a padded crop. Do you use different terms than whip?
A big part
does
of
it make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, personally, I think the whip's probably a little bit far gone now, but there's certainly areas in our industry where we can improve how we communicate. I mean, we speak about the terminology of breaking in. Now, a friend of mine, her mother was like, what, it's broken already and it's only 1 year old? And she's like, no, it means educating. So well, why don't you just say that? And as an industry, we can get very lazy in our terminology. And a lot of the time our terminology is, Jamie just said about the distal limb, it can be complex unnecessarily. And that's alienating because it's like another language for people. So a lot of what we're trying to encourage is people to be a lot more conscious of what they're saying and how they're saying it. And terms like starting and educating are obviously reflective of what that process is. Perhaps, in the 60s it was breaking in, but if anybody's seen that process now, it's quite a beautiful process to watch a horse backed for the first time. So I think if we're a lot more conscious about it, we can certainly communicate more eloquently and position our industry better.
Did you change language, Bob?
This is an issue near and dear to my heart. And most companies and big organizations, when it comes to these issues of sustainability, they're horrible at communicating it to the public. And because they try to employ the traditional messages of marketing and communications, which is, hype and hyperbole and exaggeration, et cetera. When it comes to these issues, the key element for language is starting with the end in mind. You need to have the consumer, your stakeholders, believe in what you say. You need to have credibility. You need to be seen as being honest and authentic. So whatever language you're using, it has to be real. So I would have all the communicators at McDonald's, they would say, here's a statement for you. And I go, that doesn't sound like a real statement. It doesn't sound like a human being would say this. I wasn't allowed to use the word obesity for 5 years because our lawyers, by the way, the lawyers, I'm not sure about your industry, but the lawyers they like to make their imprint. And you can't do this, you can't say that, because you're gonna get in trouble. Well, obesity is obesity. Why can't you recognize, you got to have honest language. So without getting into particular of the actual words, you have to be honest that, hey, there is an obesity issue. And then you can go, otherwise you're just allowing the people that you're trying to talk to not be believable.
I'm still sort of struggling with how you get right on the front foot then. With so many of these issues. If we're really crude about it, you're involved in a sport where horses will die from time to time. And that is a desperately difficult message to convey. Jamie, we heard about the importance of, in fact, Joe said on day one from British Horse Racing Authority, politicians don't want logic, they don't want research, they don't want evidence, they want sentiment because that leads to votes. So how do you get over that sort of hurdle?
Well, again, I think we keep coming back to authentic communications. I think you need, as I say, I think the independent person, and Bob said the same thing, someone from outside that has the credibility sitting behind them, I think they need to be the key communicators that we're looking at engaging. like people don't want to hear from the likes of me saying horse racing's great. I mean, that's ineffective. You know, again, so it comes back to authenticity, being real, being honest, and having, in my view, the proper people putting the message out there.
It's a good message on which to close this session. Thank you very much indeed. A lot of really important discussion. Bob, brilliant to have you into that discussion and expressing your views of what you've seen and heard over the last few days. Ladies and gentlemen, please express your thanks for our panel.